being involved, then we'll find a position for you. So they came up with a position called the membership chair. Membership chair didn't really do anything, but it did get me in the young lawyers section board meetings. And through that, I eventually became vice president, then chair elect, and then chair. At that point, I felt very welcomed by the Cincinnati Bar Association. The people that worked for the bar at that time were very helpful. I would imagine that John felt the same way. And I was meeting people, meeting lawyers who were helping me with my practice. And there was no more of the negativity that I had felt in the 60s and 70s in terms of how Black attorneys were treated. As we move on through the 80s, I get to know some more people like Mike Hawkins, and it's obvious that people want to change the perception of the Cincinnati Bar Association. And one of those changes came about with a program called Lawyer to Lawyer. And that program was so successful that it won an award with the American Bar Association. And I really started at that point to recruit Black attorneys to be active in the Bar Association. One of the attorneys that I recruited was John Williams. And I said, John, you ought to get involved in this young lawyers section. And John did, and eventually becomes chair of the young lawyers section himself. So I'm trying to share my experiences with people during the 80s. And during that same time, you see a change in the Cincinnati Bar Association and how they're treating Black attorneys. As you get into the 90s, things change again. Uh, More Black attorneys are being hired by the large firms. Uh, the Black Lawyers Association starts the scholarship banquet. The president of the Black Lawyers Association has a position on the CBA's board of directors. And it's obvious now that things are really beginning to change. So I've seen it from a point where I felt it was negative to where it is now, where it is definitely inclusive and people want to see attorneys of any race succeed in the practice.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ernie. Now we're going to go to Bea Larson, who worked with John and has some other comments and thoughts about the time that she spent with John and what she knew about John. Bea?
Yeah, let me give you a little bit more of the ancient history. You've already heard from John about Judge McLean and the difficulty he had even getting into membership in the bar. That was 1951. 1965 was another important year. That year, Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, whom you all know about, brought together a group of Black ministers, and they campaigned to get a Black attorney on the bench, and that was William Lovelace. And surprisingly, they were successful. And the first Black attorney to become a judge, now remind you, this was a city of Cincinnati court, was William Lovelace. The next step, however, was a negative one. And the Ohio legislature, and many believe motivated to prevent this from happening again, changed the rules. And the system of courts became countywide. And it was well known that no Black was going to get elected then in a countywide election. And indeed, in fact, that was the case. Fast forward to 1972, the US Supreme Court passed the Argersinger decision. Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty brought federal money into the city to provide funding for this new ruling that not only defendants charged with felonies under Gideon, but now anyone charged who could not afford a lawyer was entitled to a lawyer at government expense. And that's when our Public Defender Division of the Legal Aid Society was formed. Bill Bowen, state senator then, came to Jack Sherman and asked him to take on the mantle of running that office. And Jack did, and brought me in as his assistant director. 74, Jack got hired away by Chase Law School. They wanted him, and he became a professor of constitutional law. And I took over as director of the office. And just a year later, John Burlew became a lawyer and joined our staff. I might say with some pride, as I was preparing to talk to you, I realized how many of the Black attorneys that were part of the public defender office later did reach the bench. Of course, there was Jack, there was Skip West, Nadine Allen, Barry Isaacs, and then John Burlew, all who later became judges. Well, in 1975, John, as you all know, was a big guy, a real presence, and he walked about with great self-assurance. And in that climate, that could have been intimidating. It could have been off-putting. Yet somehow John, with his big smile and his friendly approach, disarmed people. People were immediately drawn to him. Now realize that back in '75, when John became a member of the bar, there were no Blacks on the bench. There were no women on any bench of general jurisdiction, and there were no Democrats. So it was a very different world. Fast forward now to 1980, and the world had started to change, much in the way that Ernie has already described. And the two heads of the political parties, John Sacco Wethe, and I believe the head of the Republican Party then was George Eyrick, I'm not totally positive, they came together. And Sacco Wethe, I was in on a lunch meeting that he had with Jack Sherman, in which he said, "We've got a deal. If you were willing to run for judge for municipal court, Barry Isaacs, then a Republican, will run also, and we've agreed that you can run unopposed." And that's exactly what happened, and both Barry and Jack then became members of the bench. Fast forward again, 30 years after Judge McLean was finally admitted to the CBA, the Roundtable was formed. Judge Nathaniel Jones and Judge Robert Black, a Black Democrat, a white Republican. And many of you know the history of what flowed, the many programs that flowed from the Roundtable and continue to, with Judge Tim Black and Judge Hopkins, although there may have been a change in leadership very recently. I'm not sure about that. Maybe one of you do know. So that's the world that John entered and had a tremendous impact upon.
All right, next we're gonna hear from Randy Burlew, John's daughter, who's gonna talk about her father.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me here and letting me talk for a few minutes about what a great privilege it was to have him as a father. And I'd like to start actually by sharing a quote with you. In August of 1995, the Inquirer did a profile of my father. And in that interview, he said, "Whatever else I may or may not regret at the end of my life, I am not going to regret that I was not involved with my family." And I have to tell you, if that was the goal he had for his life, he was an overwhelming success. In fact, one of the interviews that the reporter did for that series took place at my sister's soccer practice, not because my father was coaching, but because he just didn't want to miss it. And he didn't think being interviewed was a reason to miss out on one of her soccer practices. And I can tell you that despite all of his professional success and commitments, he always made it clear to us that family was his priority and that he was a dad first. And in fact, as I got older and became more aware of his achievements, I was actually pretty surprised. I knew my dad was brilliant, and I knew that when he put his name on something, he gave it his all. But what was surprising was that someone who spent, from my vantage point, so much of his time and energy on his family had anything left to do all of the other things that he did professionally and what he did in the community. And one example of that is the Ted Berry Award that he received. And he actually received that award a few days after my sister's wedding. However, he forbade us from telling her that he was actually getting the award because he didn't want it to interfere at all in her wedding planning or her wedding. He actually didn't even tell me about it until I came home for the wedding itself. And he made it seem very casual. He just wanted that moment to be all about my sister, and he couldn't bring himself to do or say anything that would distract from that moment or take any of the spotlight away from her. And in contrast, he went out of his way to celebrate any achievement that my sister, my mother, or I had, whether it was secretly flying my sister and I into town to see my mother receive an award, or instructing his staff on the bench to get him off of the bench immediately when word came about a fellowship that I received that he had spent months preparing me for. He was our biggest fan and our biggest cheerleader, and I never saw him happier than when he was celebrating one of us. He was also, one of my biggest role models, not because he accomplished so much in his career, and not because he had a lot of opinions and gave a lot of advice, which anyone who knew him knew he did, but because he lived his life in a way that made us believe that all things were possible for us. And he modeled for us that not only was it important to dream big dreams and set big goals, but that it was important not to let big obstacles get in the way of achieving them. And when he started losing his vision, it was really important for him to maintain his independence and to keep reaching higher. And this meant doing things like taking the city bus to the courthouse and organizing logistics so that he could make meetings in Columbus for the Civil Rights Commission. And it also meant hiring someone to read case material for him so he could prepare for court. But he rarely complained about the obstacles that losing his vision presented to him, and he never let them stop him from doing the things that he had set his mind to doing. Michelle Obama said recently about her husband that being president doesn't change who you are, it reveals who you are. And I would say, as a daughter who thought her father hung the moon, that losing his vision really revealed who he was. It really revealed his character. It's one thing to not let your loss of vision stop you from pursuing your professional ambitions, but it's another to not let that stop you from making a contribution as you can to your community and to your family. And my father remained committed to serving his family and community, oftentimes in ways that most people would never hear about. After losing his vision, my father would regularly take the bus to my maternal grandparents' house to cut their grass. And he knew that he had to do it regularly because if he waited even a day longer than what my grandfather thought was acceptable, then my grandfather, then in his 80s, would do it himself. And I remember one of the neighbors saying, I don't know what's so great about Mr. Horde, my grandfather, but he's got a judge cutting his grass. And that was my dad. And another one of our family's favorite memories about him that I really think speak to his character was that one year around Christmas time, there was a young man that my parents had taken a strong liking to, who was living in very humble circumstances. And that Christmas, that young man's father didn't have any money to do anything to celebrate for Christmas. And it just so happened that there was a really bad snowstorm that year, and the snow was so bad that my mother didn't feel like it was safe for her to drive to their apartment. And so my father took a bus in the middle of the snowstorm to drop off money to this young man's father so that he could do something for his son for Christmas. And I think that's the example that my father tried to set for us, how to be of service to your family, to your community, and to your profession. And so I'll just end by saying that, my sister and I were talking shortly after my father passed about what it felt like, what that loss felt like for us. And something she said really struck me. She said that having Dad around was like having your own personal superhero. We didn't really worry too much about taking risks in life or being out in the world because we knew he was there to back us up and to help us pick up the pieces when things didn't go our way. But without him here, we feel a lot more vulnerable in the world. However, we also feel just so appreciative that he gave us the roots we needed to stay grounded and feel safe, and the wings we needed to fly and go after our goals. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from Mike Hawkins.
Thank you, John. So I think this dialogue is just so relevant today for a variety of reasons. Obviously, some of the societal challenges, Black History Month, but also because, and Randy mentioned, being of service was important. And because of what John did and the value of his service, it still lives on today, which we still have through the whole progression of the Cincinnati Bar. The other thing that I'm going to allude to, and I think is very important in terms of the contribution John made, was the willingness to have dialogue. And anybody listening, and for all of us, I just can't stress enough how important open dialogue is in making differences and change culture, et cetera. And that happened in large part because John, who was president of the bar late 80s, I was president in 93. So we crossed paths quite a bit through the bar leadership process. And in a particular conversation that John and I had, he was expressing, and it was somewhat obvious, as Ernie has alluded to, and I want to give a shout out to Ernie because he was real instrumental in a lot of these efforts. But John was expressing how, really here in Cincinnati, Black lawyers, white lawyers, and that was the focus back in the late 80s and early 90s more than anything else for the bar. We don't work together. We don't share professional experiences. We, go home. We're separated in that regard. Issues about the law firms and recruiting and those kinds of things. And as a result of those discussions, I really talked to John about, hey, as president of the bar, would you be on board and pitch in? And I know Ernie really played a role. John, you were involved yourself. But we did create the Lawyer to Lawyer program. Jack Sherman, who was president right behind me, we teamed up. We became the partners of a Lawyer to Lawyer, Jack and I did, and still have a lifelong friendship. But the importance of that was that active participation in the Bar Association brought about ability for lawyers of different backgrounds, different cultures, different races to talk and come together on important issues for the profession. And it was a result of that, and it lingers on today because, we still have a vestige of Lawyer to Lawyer and now connecting beyond the law for lawyers. And it's not just about lawyers of color, but, LGBTQ and a whole lot of other dynamics about creating a more inclusive and welcoming profession. So I just really emphasize that John's contribution, willingness to have dialogue and express opinions and really encourage any lawyer, even today, about how important it is to be open with others who might be different than you, share experiences, share challenges, and you will find allies and champions for various issues. So I think it's a tribute to the Cincinnati Bar, but in many ways a bigger tribute to John Berlew and his friendship. And then as the years went on, even, when John was losing his sight, his vision, being able to connect with him at events, his meeting his wife, sharing those kinds of things was all very positive and instrumental, I know, for me and for many others. So great guy, great lawyer, and his contribution still lives on.
All right, thanks, Mike. Well, I mean, part of what our program, what we're trying to discuss today and just convey and talk about Black History Month is we wanted to honor John as the first African-American president, but also we wanted to have a dialogue to just talk about how far diversity and inclusion has come in the bar and how far we still need to go. And so part of what my role is to maybe talk a little bit what happened after John and the years in between. I was president in 2017. As Ernie pointed out, Ernie was one of the first people that when I came to town, I worked at the prosecutor's office. Ernie did talk to me about the Young Lawyers section back in 88, 89. And the odd thing about it is, I think I met John probably my first year on the job as prosecutor. I didn't know John as the president of Cincinnati Bar Association. I had just moved from Buffalo. I didn't even really know what the Bar Association was at that particular time. I just knew that everyone talked about John Burlew, and if he comes in the court, that John Burlew is probably going to win. So, you know, as an eager first-year attorney, I was ready to take on John Burlew to see if it was all true, what everyone said about him. And I think how B just summed it up, you know, you would think, looking at John, that you should be completely intimidated by. And he was not like that at all. He was a big, gentle bear as far as I'm concerned. And you're right, B, once he smiled, everything was cool. But he did beat me also. But over the years, we had a couple of contests here and there, and it worked out. Sometimes my way, most times his way. But when I went to my first Bar Association meeting, I got to this young lawyer event, I saw John there. And, you know, it's interesting to me because I had this impression that the Bar Association was a bunch of stuffy, what we called big firm folks back then. And I was surprised that John, who I knew was in a small practice, who was at the courthouse like the rest of us, you know, what some people would call us ham and eggers, just every day down at the courthouse, was actually the bar president. I had no idea that this guy that I had been seeing at the courthouse was the actual president of the Bar Association. And I was impressed because, you know, even from my time in law school in Buffalo, you know, we met all the Bar Association president of Buffalo. Everybody was white. Everybody at the Bar Association in Buffalo was white. Because even as a young lawyer, I mean, as a student, I had some contact with the Erie County Bar Association. And so I was very impressed that this man was the president of the Bar Association. So having said that, I know that the next president that I encountered, the next time that there was an African-American, was Jack Sherman. And some folks have already talked about Jack Sherman and some of the things that he's done. I know that Mike and Jack had a special relationship, and Ernie talked about this too with the Lawyer to Lawyer program, which is still in existence today with a different title that changed in the last 6 months to Connecting Beyond, or the law, I think it's called now. Mike, you can correct me, whatever, I forgot the exact name. But those are the types of programs that, from a diversity inclusion perspective, that from a national recognition, the Cincinnati Bar Association getting recognition for this for a long time. Also for our Swell program, we've been getting recognition for that. And I know that in my 32 plus years of being with the Bar Association, that it's come a long way. I am glad that during my tenure, which was unfortunately approximately maybe 30 years after Jack, if my math is right, that I became the third African-American president. That's a big gap. But in between all that, I know that the Bar Association has had a sincere effort at trying to diversify and keeping the diversity initiative going. As was pointed out, by starting to by giving BLAC a seat at the table at the Bar Association, and expanding in that to also to dedicate a seat from the Women's Association also. So from a diversity and inclusion perspective, the bar has been trying for a long time to get it right, and we're still working on that. And I'm happy to say that today, when I look at the bar, I believe currently the bar is 1/3 minority, which is unusual, because I know I sat through a hell of a lot of bar association meetings where I was the only Black person in the room. And every minority question was kind of directed at me. So for a change now, when I go to bar association meetings, I don't have to speak for all minorities, which I'm relieved not to have to do, because I don't know what everybody's thinking. So I'm even happier to report that I've seen the recent nominating slate. I believe that next year it's even going to be a higher percentage minority. And that's why I think that our Diversity Inclusion Committee has helped a lot with that. I think that our outreach to young lawyers has helped a great deal. And I also think that we have more people who are willing to work with the bar. The bar is not the big firm place it used to be. It is a nice mix of all types of lawyers from all backgrounds. And I would like to next introduce Janae Estrada, who I'm very proud to say that will eventually be the first African-American president of the Cincinnati Bar Association, African-American female president of Cincinnati Bar Association. Janae?
Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm thankful to the bars that I have been included in this program. I'm supposed to talk about the future of the bar, but I also just wanted to add a story about Judge Burlew that encouraged me in law school. So I was in law school. I was asked by someone what I want to do in my career. And I said, eventually I want to be a judge. And they told me, I know this great person, and I'll contact them, sit with them. And he allowed me to sit in with him on the bench right next to him. And there was one case that has gained some attention, or that I was lucky to see, I think, justice in action. And it really showed me the power of what a judge could do, and the understanding of culture that Black judges bring to the bench in this particular situation. And it was a young man. It was during Jazz Festival when we had those, walking down the street, had a boom box, and his music, it was like a disorderly conduct he was cited for, and his music was going, and that was the complaint by the officer. And Judge Burlew asked the question, was this, during the regular time when all the cars are out there and their music is up, and how are you saying that this one person is the person who was, annoying whomever? And it was that very technical piece of it. And when I say technical, as in cultural, that he understood what happened because he had been there, he had experienced it. And so he could put himself in that place to ask those questions. So it was, and he found the person not guilty. And as a law student, my thinking was, that judges align with, and this was my first year, that judges always align with the police for the most part. And he really showed me that full spectrum that day. And so I'm thankful that he opened up his courtroom to me, and then took me around to meet the other Black judges. But now to the future. So I am very excited about the future of the CBA. I joined the board about 5 years ago. And at that time, I was very lucky that there was a focused effort by Doug Dennis, who was the president at the time, and John Williams, who was the president-elect at the time, and the CBA as a whole to increase diversity. And that started with putting, deliberately seeking good candidates from various backgrounds to join the Bar Association. And I was one of those individuals. And I will say the CBA has committed itself to diversity in practice. So in addition to some of the programs that have been discussed, we have John talked about the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, which was formed and he leads now. There is also a Racial and Social Justice Committee that is getting started. And I'm excited about the two leaders of that committee and the work that they're doing. And so what encourages me most is that the committees are not study committees. And so for me personally, as a Black person, it is important that they are action committees. And I say that because committees and organizations are formed to study Black people. We've been studied enough. We know what the issues are. And now we need to take action so that we aren't continuing to study, all of these issues, and we need to resolve them. And so I am very happy that these committees, like I said, are action committees, and they are working very deliberately to create a bar that everyone feels welcomed in. So the committees work to increase the number of diverse lawyers, to increase the membership and participation of diverse lawyers, and I think most important, to create leadership opportunities for diverse lawyers, and so that they can excel in their careers as well as their extracurricular activity. So I will say the bar is engaging in community programming to encourage voting, becoming more vocal about issues that affect minority communities. And so I'm excited where we are. I'm excited where we are headed. I am happy to currently serve in the role of the secretary of the board, and more excited that if the membership accepts the slate that will be presented at the annual meeting, that in a few years, by operation of the bylaws, I would be the first Black woman to lead the CBA. But as far as we have come, we're still having firsts. And so that's our challenge. And we are making progress, but we have to make sure that each of us is committed to eliminating someone having to say the first. And so again, thank you for having me and allowing me to speak about the future of the bar. And I hope all of you continue to join us on this journey.
Thank you. And I forgot to introduce you as the Honorable Janae Trotter-Ratt. I'm sorry about that. I did. All right. All right.
No offense taken.
Okay. All right. I noticed that John's wife, Kathy, I believe, is on. And Kathy, if you would like to say anything about your husband, feel free, or even Robin, I think is his
Hello,
other
everybody. Thank
Hi.
you for doing this in John's honor. It was important to our family. I did want to add for B. Larson, that was his first boss as a lawyer. And they were so close that I think B. Larson used to call him her son. So it was just such a special relationship and a special time that they had. But thanks again for having this session.
You're welcome. All right, I guess we have a few minutes. If anyone has any questions or any comments, feel free to
John, I do.
go ahead.
When I saw John's family here, I'll make this as brief as I can. A number of years ago, one of the legal assistants in my office came to me and talked about her younger brother, who was 14, was hanging around with the wrong kind of kids, getting in a lot of trouble and where it was going. And she asked if I would talk to him. I thought a better choice would be John Burlew. The young man was African-American. And so I went down and asked John, and he said, well, don't come down today, but come on when I'm in room A. And he just completely disregarded my need to get billable hours that day. And he took that young man, Judge Bratton, and sent his bailiff out into the courtroom, picked that young man up and took him up there and set him next to him on the bench. And in room A, they bring in all these people that have been locked up overnight. It looked like hell. And, you know, just one after another after another. And he got through the whole docket. Then he, just to further make the day expensive for me, took him back into his chambers and talked to him for the better part of an hour, which I pried out of this 14-year-old. Anybody who's had kids knows that 14-year-olds don't give out information very well. But the judge had essentially asked him in various ways, you've seen where you're headed. What do you want to do about it? Now John was very nice, but I've always thought the impact that he had on a young man's life like that was very significant. He was so generous with his time and so disrespectful of mine. But I've known John Burlew forever, and I always liked that aspect about him. But I know John's family has heard a lot of good stories about him, but that was one that I've carried around with me all these years. One of my favorite John Burlew stories. And I thought you might want to know how generous he was and how, you know how generous he was, but another example of how generous he was and what an impact he could have on our community. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. Anyone else? Any comments? Okay. All right, then. Well, I think that will conclude our session today. I want to thank our panelists, everyone who spoke today about John Burlew and the diversity and inclusion within the Bar Association. As the Honorable Judge Trotter pointed out, I got to get used to that because I haven't seen you since. I haven't seen you that much with Zoom. Pointed out, got a lot of work to do, but you know, we've done a lot of work, and we just got to keep moving forward. And the only way we keep moving forward is we got to engage in dialogue like this. But more importantly, I think that Judge Trotter's right. You know, no more studies. We know what we need to do. We just all have to step up and do it. So,
John,
again,
I might just add, you know, for those of you who don't participate in the Connecting Beyond the Law program, hopefully listening to these comments and observations by everybody, you'll participate and engage in it and become one of the participants in the program to really build cultural competence. And as the judge is pointing out, Judge Trotter, I think it's so important on the execution side. So the more you know, the better you understand, the more you dialogue, the greater the likelihood you'll take actions to make a difference.
And before we leave, I just wanted to say I'm Lisa McPherson. I've been with the Bar Association since 1998, and I joined as Director of Continuing Education. And John Burlew was always so generous with his time in speaking for us. And I always felt that he would walk off the elevator, and you would just see his smile, and he made you think that he had nothing else to do in the day, that he zeroed in on talking to you and was just the kindest, really a beautiful person, and what a fantastic legacy, and will always be very dear to my heart. So thank you to the gentleman for being here.
All right. All right. If there are no other comments, I think that we are concluded for today. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Bye-bye.